During 12 to 17 August 1969, Northern Ireland was rocked by intense political and sectarian rioting. There had been sporadic violence throughout the year arising from the civil rights campaign, which was demanding an end to discrimination against Irish Catholics. Civil rights marchers were repeatedly attacked by both Ulster Protestant loyalists and by the Royal Ulster Constabulary, a unionist and largely Protestant police force. The disorder led to the Battle of the Bogside in Derry, a three-day riot in the Bogside district between the RUC and the nationalist Catholic residents. In support of the Bogsiders, nationalists and Catholics launched protests elsewhere in Northern Ireland. Some of these led to attacks by loyalists working alongside the police. The most bloody rioting was in Belfast, where 7 people were killed and hundreds more wounded. Scores of houses, most of them owned by Catholics, as well as businesses and factories, were burned out. In addition, thousands of mostly Catholic families were driven from their homes. In certain areas, the RUC helped the loyalists and failed to protect Catholic areas. Events in Belfast have been viewed by some as a pogrom against the Catholic and nationalist minority. The British Army was deployed to restore order and state control, and peace lines began to be built to separate the two sides. The events of August 1969 are widely seen as the beginning of the 30-year conflict known as the Troubles. Background: Northern Ireland was destabilized throughout 1968 by sporadic rioting arising out of the civil disobedience campaign of the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association, which was demanding an end to discrimination against Catholics in voting rights, housing and employment. NICRA was opposed by Ian Paisley's Ulster Constitution Defence Committee and other loyalist groups. During the summer of 1969, before the riots broke out, the International Commission of Jurists published a highly critical report on the British government's policy in Northern Ireland. The Times wrote that this report has criticised the Northern Ireland government for police brutality, religious discrimination and gerrymandering in politics. The ICJ Secretary-General said that laws and conditions in Northern Ireland had been cited by the South African government to justify their own policies of discrimination. The Times also reported that the Ulster Special Constabulary, Northern Ireland's reserve police force, was regarded as the militant arm of the Protestant Orange Order. The Belfast Telegraph reported that the ICJ had added Northern Ireland to the list of states, jurisdictions, where the protection of human rights is inadequately assured. Events leading up to the August riots. The first major confrontation between civil rights activists and the Royal Ulster Constabulary occurred in Derry on 5 October 1968, when a NICRA march was baton-charged by the RUC. Disturbed by the prospect of major violence, the Prime Minister of Northern Ireland, Terence O'Neill, promised reforms in return for a truce, whereby no further demonstrations would be held. In spite of these promises, in January 1969, People's Democracy, a radical left-wing group, staged an anti-government march from Belfast to Derry. Ulster loyalists, including off-duty policemen, attacked the marchers a number of times, most determinedly at Burntolly Bridge outside Derry. The RUC were present but did not protect the marchers. This action, and the RUC's subsequent entry into the Bogside, led to serious rioting in Derry. In March and April 1969, there were 6 bomb attacks on electricity and water infrastructure targets, causing blackouts and water shortages. At first the attacks were blamed on the Irish Republican Army, but it later emerged that members of the loyalist Ulster Protestant Volunteers and Ulster Volunteer Force had carried out the bombings in an attempt to implicate the IRA, destabilise the Northern Ireland government and halt the reforms promised by Terence O'Neill. There was some movement on reform in Northern Ireland in the first half of 1969. On the 23rd of April, UUP Stormont MPs voted by 28 to 22 to introduce universal adult suffrage in local government elections in Northern Ireland at the Parliamentary Party meeting. The call for one man, one vote had been one of the key demands of the civil rights movement. 5 days later, Terence O'Neill resigned as UUP leader and Northern Ireland Prime Minister and was replaced in both roles by James Chichester Clark. Chichester Clark, despite having resigned in protest over the introduction of universal suffrage in local government, announced that he would continue the reforms begun by O'Neill. Street violence, however, continued to escalate. On the 19th of April there was serious rioting in the Bogside area of Derry following clashes between NICRA marchers against loyalists and the RUC. A Catholic, Samuel Devaney, was severely beaten by the RUC and later died of his injuries. On the 12th of July, during the Orange Order's 12th of July marches, there was serious rioting in Derry, Belfast and Dungiven, causing many families in Belfast to flee from their homes. Another Catholic civilian, Francis McCloskey, died one day after being hit on the head with batons by RUC officers during disturbances in Dungiven. Battle of the Bogside. Sporadic violence took place throughout the rest of the year between Catholic nationalists, Protestant loyalists and the RUC, and intensified over the summer, during the Orange Order's marching season. On the 2nd of August, there was serious rioting in Belfast when Protestant crowds from the Crumlin Road area tried to storm the Catholic Unity Flats. They were held back with difficulty by the police. This unrest culminated in a pitched battle in Derry from 12 to 15 August. The Battle of the Bogside began when violence broke out around a Loyalist Apprentice Boys of Derry parade on the 12th of August. The RUC, in trying to disperse the nationalist crowd, drove them back into the nationalist Bogside area and then tried to enter the area themselves. The Bogside's inhabitants mobilized en masse to prevent them entering the area, and a huge riot ensued between hundreds of RUC personnel and thousands of Bogsiders. On the second day of this confrontation, the 13th of August, the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association appealed for demonstrations across Northern Ireland in support of the Bogside, in an effort to draw off police resources from the conflict there. When nationalists elsewhere in Northern Ireland carried out these demonstrations, severe intercommunal violence erupted between Catholics, Protestants and the police. Rioting in Belfast. Belfast saw by far the most intense violence of the August 1969 riots. Unlike Derry, where Catholic nationalists were a majority, in Belfast they were a minority and were also geographically divided and surrounded by Protestants and Loyalists. For this reason, whereas in Derry the fighting was largely between nationalists and the RUC, in Belfast it also involved fighting between Catholics and Protestants, including exchanges of gunfire and widespread burning of homes and businesses. On the night of the 12th of August, bands of apprentice boys arrived back in Belfast after taking part in the Derry March. They were met by Protestant pipe bands and a large crowd of supporters. They then marched to the Shankill Road waving Union flags and singing "The Sash My Father Wore." According to journalists Patrick Bishop and Eamon Malley, both communities were in the grip of a mounting paranoia about the other's intentions. Catholics were convinced that they were about to become victims of a Protestant pogrom. Protestants that they were on the eve of an IRA insurrection. Wednesday, the 13th of August. The first disturbances in Northern Ireland's capital took place on the night of the 13th of August. Derry activists Eamon McCann and Sean Keenan contacted Frank Gogarty of the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association to organise demonstrations in Belfast to draw off police from Derry. Independently, Belfast IRA leader Billy Macmillan ordered Republicans to organise demonstrations in support of Derry. In protest at the RUC's actions in Derry, a group of 500 nationalists, including Republicans, assembled at Davis Flats and staged a rally outside Springfield Road RUC station, where they handed in a petition. After handing in the petition, the crowd of now 1,000–2,000 people, including IRA members such as Joe McCann, began a protest march along the Falls Road and Divis Street to the Hastings Street RUC base. When they arrived, about 50 youths broke away from the march and attacked the RUC base with stones and petrol bombs. The RUC responded by sending out riot police and by driving shell and armored cars at the crowd. Protesters pushed burning cars onto the road to stop the RUC from entering the nationalist area. At Leeson Street, roughly halfway between the clashes at Springfield and Hastings Street RUC bases, an RUC Humber armored car was attacked with a hand grenade and rifle fire. At the time, it was not known who had launched the attack, but it has since emerged that it was IRA members, acting under the orders of Billy Macmillan. Macmillan also authorized members of the Fianna to petrol bomb the Springfield Road RUC base. Shots were exchanged between the IRA and RUC. In addition to the attacks on the RUC, the car dealership of Protestant Isaac Agnew on the Falls Road was destroyed. The nationalist crowd also burnt a Catholic-owned pub and betting shop. At this stage, loyalist crowds gathered on the Shankle Road but did not join in the fighting. At night, barricades went up at the interface areas between Catholic and Protestant neighborhoods. Thursday, the 14th of August and early hours of Friday, the 15th of August. On the 14th of August, many Catholics and Protestants living on the edge of the ghettos fled their homes for safety. The Loyalists viewed the nationalist attacks of Wednesday night as an organized attempt by the IRA to undermine the constitutional position of Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom. The IRA, contrary to Loyalist belief, was responding to events rather than orchestrating them. Billy Macmillan called up all available IRA members for defensive duties and sent parties out to Cooper Street, Divis Street and St. Comgall's School on Dover Street. They amounted to 30 IRA volunteers, 12 women, 40 youths from the Fianna and 15 to 20 girls. Their arms consisted of one Thompson submachine gun, one Sten submachine gun, one Lee Enfield rifle and 6 handguns. A wee factory was also set up in Leeson Street to make petrol bombs. Their orders at the outset were to disperse people trying to burn houses, but under no circumstances to take life. Falls Shankle interface near Divis Tower. That evening, a nationalist crowd marched to Hastings Street RUC station, which they began to attack with stones for a second night. Loyalist crowds gathered at neighboring Dover and Percy Streets. They were confronted by nationalists, who had hastily blocked the streets with barricades. Fighting broke out between the rival factions at about 11 p.m. The RUC concentrated their efforts on the nationalist rioters, who they scattered with armored cars. Catholics claimed that USC officers had been seen giving guns to the Loyalists, while journalists reported seeing pike-wielding Loyalists standing among the RUC officers. From the nearby rooftop of Divis Tower Flats, a group of nationalists would spend the rest of the night raining missiles on the RUC below. A chain of people were passing stones and petrol bombs from the ground to the roof. Loyalists began pushing into the Falls Road area along Percy Street, Beverley Street and Dover Street. The rioters contained a rowdy gang of Loyalist football supporters who had returned from a match. On Dover Street, the Loyalist crowd was led by Ulster Unionist Party MP John McQuaid. On Percy Street, a Loyalist opened fire with a shotgun, and USC officers helped the Loyalists to push back the Nationalists. As they entered the Nationalist ghetto, Loyalists began burning Catholic homes and businesses on Percy Street, Beverley Street and Dover Street. At the intersection of Dover and Divis Street, an IRA unit opened fire on the crowd of RUC officers and Loyalists who were trying to enter the Catholic area. Protestant Herbert Roy was killed and 3 officers were wounded. At this point, the RUC, believing they were facing an organized uprising, deployed Shoreland armored cars mounted with heavy Browning machine guns, whose .30 caliber bullets tore through walls as if they were cardboard. In response to the RUC coming under fire at Divis Street, 3 Shoreland armored cars were called to the scene. The Shorelands were immediately attacked with gunfire, an explosive device and petrol bombs. The RUC believed that the shots had come from nearby Divis Tower. Gunners inside the Shorelands returned fire with the heavy machine guns. At least 13 Divis Tower flats were hit by high-velocity gunfire. A 9-year-old boy, Patrick Rooney, was killed by machine gun fire as he lay in bed in one of the flats. He was the first child to be killed in the violence. At about 1 o'clock, not long after the shooting of Patrick Rooney, the RUC again opened fire on Divis Tower. The shots killed Hugh McCabe, a Catholic soldier who was on leave. He and another had been on the roof of the Whitehall building and were pulling a wounded man to safety. The RUC claimed he was armed at the time when the gunfire was coming from the roof, but this was denied by many witnesses. The Republican Labour Party MP for Belfast Central, Paddy Kennedy, who was on the scene, phoned the RUC headquarters and appealed to Northern Ireland Minister for Home Affairs, Robert Porter, for the Shorelands to be withdrawn and the shooting to stop. Porter replied that this was impossible as the whole town is in rebellion. Porter told Kennedy that Donegal Street Police Station was under heavy machine gun fire. In fact, it was undisturbed throughout the riots. Some time after the killing of Hugh McCabe, some 200 Loyalists attacked Catholic Divis Street and began burning houses there. A unit of 6 IRA volunteers in St Comgall's School shot at them with a rifle, a Thompson machine gun and some pistols, keeping the attackers back and wounding 8 of them. An RUC Shoreland then arrived and opened fire on the school. The IRA gunmen returned fire and managed to escape. Falls Shankle interface near Clonard Monastery, west of St Comgall's. Loyalists broke through the Nationalist barricades on Conway Street and burned 2/3 of the houses. Catholics claimed that the RUC held them back so that the Loyalists could burn the homes. The Scarman report found that RUC officers were on Conway Street when its houses were set alight but failed to take effective action. Journalist Max Hastings read that Loyalists on Conway Street had been begging the RUC to give them the guns. Ardoyne rioting in Ardoyne, north of the city centre, began in the evening near Holy Cross Catholic Church. Loyalists crossed over to the Catholic Nationalist side of Crumlin Road to attack Brookfield Street, Herbert Street, Butler Street and Hooker Street. These had been hastily blocked by Nationalist barricades. Loyalists reportedly threw petrol bombs at Catholics over the heads of RUC officers. As RUC armoured cars were used to smash through the barricades, the IRA had little presence in Ardoyne and its defence was organised by a group of ex-servicemen armed with shotguns. The Nationalist gunmen fired the first shots at the RUC, who who responded by firing machine guns down the streets, killing 2 Catholic civilians and wounding 10 more. Friday, the 15th of August. The morning of the 15th of August saw many Catholic families in central Belfast flee to Andersonstown on the western fringes of the city, to escape the rioting. According to Bishop and Malley, each side's perceptions of the other's intentions had become so warped that the Protestants believed the Catholics were clearing the decks for a further attempt at insurrection in the evening. At 4:30 on Friday, the 15th of August, the police commissioner for Belfast asked for military aid. For the early hours of Friday, the RUC had withdrawn to its bases to defend them. The interface areas were thus left unpoliced for half a day until the British Army arrived. The deputy police commissioner had assumed that the British Army would be deployed by 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. At 12:25 that afternoon, the Northern Ireland Cabinet finally sent a request for military aid to the Home Office in London. However, it would be another 9 hours until the British Army arrived at the Falls-Shankill interface where it was needed. Many Catholics and nationalists felt that they had been left at the mercy of the loyalists by the forces of the state who were meant to protect them. The IRA, which had limited manpower and weaponry at the start of the riots, was also exhausted and low on ammunition. Its Belfast commander, Billy Macmillan, and 19 other Republicans were arrested by the RUC early on the 15th of August under the Special Powers Act. Falls-Shankill interface near Clonard Monastery on the 15th of August. Violence continued along the Falls-Shankill interface. Father P. J. Egan of Clonard Monastery recalled that a large loyalist mob moved down Cooper Street at about 1500 and was held back by nationalist youths. Shooting began at about 1545. Egan claimed that himself and other priests at Clonard Monastery made at least 4 calls to the RUC for help, but none came. A small IRA party under Billy McKee was present and had 22 rifles at their disposal. They exchanged shots with a loyalist sniper who was firing from a house on Cooper Street, but failed to dislodge him, or to halt the burning of Catholic houses in the area. Almost all of the houses on Bombay Street were burned by the loyalists, and many others were burned on Kashmir Road and Cooper Street, the most extensive destruction of property during the riots. A loyalist sniper shot dead Gerald Macaulay, a member of the Fianna, as he helped people flee the homes on Bombay Street. At about 1830, the British Army's the Royal Regiment of Wales was deployed on the Falls Road, where they were greeted with subdued applause and cheering. However, despite pleas from locals, they did not move into the streets that were being attacked. At about 21:35 that night, the soldiers finally took up positions at the blazing interface and blocked the streets with barbed wire barricades. Father P. J. Egan recalled that the soldiers called on the loyalists to surrender, but they instead began shooting and throwing petrol bombs at the soldiers. The soldiers could only fire back on the orders of an officer when life was directly threatened. The Loyalists continued shooting and burned more Catholic-owned houses on Bombay Street, but were stopped by soldiers using tear gas. Ardoyne British soldiers were not deployed in Ardoyne, and violence continued there on Friday night. Nationalists hijacked 50 buses from the local bus depot, set them on fire and used them as makeshift barricades to block access to Ardoyne. According to Republican activist Martin Meehan, 20 Catholics were wounded by shotgun fire that night. A Protestant civilian, David Linton, was shot dead by nationalist gunmen at the Palmer Street, Crumlin Road junction. Several Catholic-owned houses were set alight on Brookfield Street. The Scarman report found that an RUC armored vehicle was nearby when Brookfield Street was set alight, but made no move. Saturday, the 16th of August. On the evening of the 16th of August, the British Army was deployed on Crumlin Road. Thereafter, the violence died down into what the Scarman report called the quiet of exhaustion. Disturbances elsewhere. In aid of the Bogsiders, the NICRA executive decided to launch protests in towns across Northern Ireland. The Scarman report concluded that the spread of the disturbances owed much to a deliberate decision by some minority groups to relieve police pressure on the rioters in Londonderry. It included the NICRA among these groups. On the evening of the 11th of August, a riot erupted in Dungannon after a meeting of the NICRA. This was quelled after the RUC baton-charged nationalist rioters down Irish Street. There were claims of police brutality. On the 12th of August, protesters attacked the RUC bases in Coal Island, Strabane and Newry. On the 13th of August, there were further riots in Dungannon, Coal Island, Dungiven, Armagh and Newry. In Coal Island, USC officers opened fire on rioters without orders but were immediately ordered to stop. On the 14th of August, riots continued in Dungannon, Armagh and Newry. In Dungannon and Armagh, USC officers again opened fire on rioters. They fired 24 shots on Armagh's Cathedral Road, killing Catholic civilian John Gallagher and wounding 2 others. In Newry, nationalist rioters surrounded the RUC station and attacked it with petrol bombs. In Crossmaglen on the 17th of August, the RUC station was attacked with petrol bombs and 3 hand grenades. Reactions. On the 13th of August, Taoiseach Jack Lynch made a television address in which he stated that the Irish Defence Forces would set up field hospitals along the border. He went on to say, "It is evident that the Stormont government is no longer in control of the situation. Indeed, the present situation is the inevitable outcome of the policies pursued for decades by successive Stormont governments. It is clear also that the Irish government can no longer stand by and see innocent people injured and perhaps worse." On the 14th of August, Northern Ireland Prime Minister James Chichester Clark stated in the House of Commons, "This is not the agitation of a minority seeking by lawful means the assertion of political rights. It is the conspiracy of forces seeking to overthrow a government democratically elected by a large majority. What the teenage hooligans seek beyond cheap kicks I do not know, but of this I am quite certain: they are being manipulated and encouraged by those who seek to discredit and overthrow this government." On the 23rd of August, Cardinal William Conway, together with the bishops of Derry, Clogher, Dromore, Kilmore, and Down and Ampconnor, issued a statement which included the following: "The fact is that on Thursday and Friday of last week the Catholic districts of Falls and Ardoyne were invaded by mobs equipped with machine guns and other firearms. A community which was virtually defenseless was swept by gunfire and streets of Catholic homes were systematically set on fire. We entirely reject the hypothesis that the origin of last week's tragedy was an armed insurrection.